Believe it or not, on February 25th, I will have been doing same name, different game for 10 years. The first episode on Salamander, aka Life Force, dropped a decade ago on blip.tv and onthestick.com when that was still an actual website. And though it may shock you, I have made some mistakes in that time. So now it's time to correct the record. I'm Joe, and consider this a mea culpa for all the mistakes I've made in the past decade. In the course of 10 years, it is inevitable that you'll slip up. And friends, I have slipped up. I try to own it in comments and on Twitter and wherever else you might find me, but I've felt for a long time like this would inevitably be the best way to point out my errors. So let's do it. I've broken my screw-ups into 3 categories: wrong opinions, wrong gameplay, and wrong history. Wrong opinions are, I hope obviously, cases where my taste has changed, or I explored a game further, or something along those lines. Basically, I've changed my mind on something subjective. Wrong gameplay is a thing that I got wrong about a feature or gameplay function. Stuff like characters, stages, attacks, or whatever. Finally, wrong history is instances where I asserted something related to a game was so, but that thing is not so. In one case, it's just a mispronunciation of a developer's name, but in many, it's more than that. These are honestly the worst ones, or at least broadly the ones I find the most embarrassing. So, with that, let's get underway with my bad opinions. This might be the thing that really got this video conceptually off the ground. Way back in only the 4th episode of SNDG, I said that Super NES Mortal Kombat had better music than the Genesis version.
Better. As far as the sound goes, it probably goes without saying that the Sony-designed SNES sound chip far outdoes the Genesis FM synthesis sound chip.
And I've been apologizing for it ever since. I mean, here's me on a panel at Too Many Games in 2015 apologizing for it.
Those things were like, I made a video about this years ago, and I said the Super Nintendo music was better. And listening to that, like, I don't know what I was thinking.
That's why it sounded muddled.
Was I sniffing glue when I scripted that video? Because the Genesis music is way better. Sounds way.
So, yeah, that's ridiculous. I mean, just listen. Similarly, I said the same thing about Beavis and Butthead, and just, wow. I don't know what was going through my brain back in 2011 and 2012, but I feel compelled to apologize because, come on.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa.
We need a stop.
Finally, I was wrong about which version of Double Dragon 2 The Revenge is better in the first Double Dragon 2 episode. What I had not taken into account in my analysis was the Famicom version. Now, don't worry, I'm not planning a 5th video about Double Dragon 2 to talk about that version. I can be concise right here. You can beat the true final boss and see the ending on the standard difficulty, and you get as many continues as you need to beat it without using some bizarre code. And honestly, that's enough to push it past the PC Engine Super CD-ROM version, though I do still like both. Welcome to the biggest section. Sometimes I miss things because I just never saw them in the course of playing the game. Sometimes I miss them because they're not well documented. Sometimes I just didn't mention them, but people bring them up in the comments. These are loosely in chronological order, so let's get to it. Starting with the very first episode, I hit a weird one. I said that the aspect ratios of arcade monitors were different from consumer CRTs.
But in what I consider a somewhat strange decision, the screen scrolls up and down in the horizontal stages to make up for the fact that arcade monitors have a different aspect ratio than televisions. Well, the Nintendo game...
And while I guess you could make an argument in the case of vertically oriented games like Pac-Man or Donkey Kong, even those are still just 4x3 monitors mounted on their side. But that's really besides the point, because Life Force isn't a vertically oriented game even in the arcade. This is just straight up wrong, and I honestly don't know why I said it. In the only episode of 2013 on Saturday Night Slam Masters, the radiant Joey Pink mentioned that the Genesis port lacks 4-player support for the Tornado Tag match, but completely failed to mention that it actually completely lacks the Tornado Tag match altogether. And sticking with wrestling episodes, in the WWF Warzone episode, we said that both games have the same roster. But what the Radiant One forgot is that Turok Dinosaur Hunter is a secret character in the N64 version, as the same developer and publisher duo were responsible for that N64 exclusive first-person shooter. Let's talk Capcom Fighters for a minute. In Marvel vs. Capcom and Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, there actually is a reason the Japanese titles have the EX suffix. They include, in all regions, EX cancels, a move where you can interrupt a super move to do a different super move. The arcade versions and other ports do not have these specific cancels. While we're on the subject, here's a weird one. In the Street Fighter Alpha episode, I pointed out that the shadows in the arcade version are transparent, not opaque like the other ports, which confused me when it came to the PS2 version. Well, in making this video, I asked Digital Eclipse's Mike Micah why, and he told me in the original games they're actually supposed to flicker at 60 frames per second, and they changed them to just a transparent texture to both conform with anti-epilepsy rules for modern console makers, as well as prevent issues with certain modern TVs. So, there you go. In Three Stooges, the finger-pointing icon doesn't waste a day. You can actually see the day counter doesn't go up in the footage I used in this video, so I really just whiffed on that one. And that wraps up the gameplay errors I've made, but let's move on to the final and most embarrassing section. Yes, this is where I messed up my research, or made assumptions, or in some cases just screwed up because I didn't double-check research I had done earlier. Let's start with Ghouls and Ghosts. I said this.
The Genesis game is basically the arcade game, though it's technically less graphically accurate than the Super Graphics or X68000 ports, but those never came to America and were released some time after this version.
But
Either way, the Genesis hardware was
while that is technically true of the X68000 port, which didn't come until 5 years after the Genesis one, the Super Graphics got a port less than a year later in 1990. Which I suppose is some time if I'm being pedantic, but that's definitely not what I meant. But let's stick with the PC Engine for a moment. In the Street Fighter II episode, I said the following.
It pulled it off on one of the physically largest hue cards. Take a look at that. That's Street Fighter II. And there's a normal Hue card. They stuffed extra chips into this thing just to make it have enough memory to carry this game.
But that's nonsense. NEC made that Hue card with the extra bump to visually indicate the size of the actual ROM, which was 20 megabits, the largest ever in the Hue card format. But the way I phrased it makes it sound like it's got the PC Engine equivalent of the Super FX chip in a Super NES game, and that is not what's happening here. In the Super Mario 2 episode, I mispronounced Takashi Tezuka's name as Takahashi. I put a correction in that video, but I wanted to say so here just to cover my bases. When I talked about Super Ghouls and Ghosts, I said,
the first two games were headed up by Takuro Fujiwara, who worked in Capcom's arcade division. But for the third game in the series, Super Ghouls and Ghosts, known in Japan as Cho Makaimura, or Ultra Demon World Village, the reins were passed to Yoshinori Takenaka, a veteran of Capcom's home division, where he worked on games like DuckTales and Mega Man 3, among many others.
But, no, that's not right. He actually directed the GBA version. Our homeboy Takuro Fujiwara directed the SNES version, just like every other mainline entry in the G&G series, including the forthcoming G&G Resurrection. In the Gradius 3 episode, I made it sound like Gradius 2 on the MSX home computer was a port of the arcade version. That was not my intention. So, to be crystal clear, it's a completely original game, not a port from the arcade. And in the Beavis and Butthead Revisited episode, I said this.
There are a lot of Beavis and Butthead games. According to Moby Games, there were 12, including the unreleased arcade cabinet, all of them exclusive to North America.
But, in fact, there was a Japan-only PS1 version of Virtual Stupidity, including a full Japanese voice dub in case you ever wanted to know what those two would sound like in Japanese. Okay, we're gonna rapid fire a couple here. Going back to Capcom, Trojan was not, in fact, Capcom's first internally developed home game. It was Commando, and I did correct that in the following episode, but again, wanted to put it here as well. In the Three Stooges episode, I casually mentioned Cinemaware being a British developer. But they're not. They're from the United States. They just made a lot of games for microcomputers, which I associate with the British, I guess. In completely non-video game related corrections, the first thing called WrestleFest by the World Wrestling Federation was actually not the direct-to-VHS supercard at Milwaukee County Stadium. There were a handful of house shows advertised regionally as WrestleFest earlier in the 80s under the WWF banner, although that Milwaukee show was the first one presented nationally as such. This one was released in June. I misspoke in a pretty serious way when I said the Saturn version of Symphony of the Night came from Konami Computer Entertainment Kobe. It was actually Nagoya who was responsible for that one, along with Castlevania Legends on the Game Boy. Which brings us to, finally, two mistakes I made in the latest episode, believe it or not. Cataloging 10 games can get cumbersome, and I straight up missed that Jeopardy Sports Edition did get a port to the Game Gear. So my statement about the Game Gear never getting another Jeopardy was incorrect. The other mistake is my fault for not doing more rigorous research. The PS2 Jeopardy game got a port to the PC under the title Jeopardy 2003. But it's not listed on Moby Games, which is my general go-to for stuff like this. What's more interesting, though, is that the person who pointed this out to me also let me know that it came in boxes of cereal in Canada. Free video games are seriously the best cereal prizes. Just ask all those people who love Chex Quest. And with that, we'll start another decade of me getting things wrong, and you fine folks letting me know, nicely, that I did, in fact, get something wrong. I'm sure also another decade of people telling me I am wrong about things that I'm not wrong about. Like that one guy who insisted that the NES Batman game was a sprite swap of an unrelated Famicom game. It wasn't. But whatever the case, I hope you'll join me as I give SNDG a proper 10th birthday celebration when I revisit Life Force and Salamander later this month. Hey folks, this is Joe, and thank you so much for watching me correct the record of the first 10 years of Same Name Different Game. Did I miss anything that I was wrong about? Let me know in the comments. And if you're new here, well, this is a weird video to start with, but welcome. Consider subscribing and hitting that stupid bell icon. If you really dug the show, consider keeping it ad-free by giving just $1 per video on Patreon or via YouTube channel membership. You'll get to vote in polls on future episodes, early access to new videos, your name here with these cool people, and more. You can also help the channel by checking out the merch link below, as well as affiliate links to small businesses that I like a lot. If you want to check out all of SNDG, the full playlist from the beginning is on the left. And if you want to have a look at the latest episode on Jeopardy, that's on the right.